Brothers, if you knew what I filmed on I-80 last week, you'd never drive alone in fog again. And the worst part? I still have the video, but I'm not sure I should have kept it. My name's Marcus, been trucking for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything these highways could throw at me. But what happened in Wyoming changed everything I thought I knew about what's out there in the dark. Some things are better left buried, but this is eating me alive from the inside. It started like any other run, hauling electronics from Omaha to Denver, nothing special about the load. I'd been driving since noon, and by 11 p.m. I was making good time through Wyoming's endless stretches. The cab was warm, classic rock playing low on the radio, and I was feeling that familiar rhythm of the road. My GPS showed 4 more hours to Denver, and I was planning to push through the night like I always do. Everything was normal, brothers, completely normal, until it wasn't. That's when I hit the fog wall, and I mean literally hit it like driving into a grey concrete barrier. 1 second I'm cruising under clear stars, the next I'm swallowed by the thickest fog I've ever seen in my life. My headlights, those powerful LED beams that usually cut through anything, were useless, barely illuminating 2 feet ahead. The temperature gauge showed the outside temp had dropped 10 degrees in less than a minute. Something about this fog felt wrong, unnatural, like it had a weight to it that pressed against the windshield. The first thing that got my attention was the smell, metallic, like wet iron mixed with something rotten. It seeped through the air vents, even though I had them on recirculate, filling the cab with this sick, cloying stench. My engine, that reliable Cummins that purrs like a beast, suddenly sounded muffled and distant, like the fog was swallowing every sound. I rolled down the window for just a second to check, and the silence outside was absolute. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just that terrible metallic smell and a cold that bit into my skin like tiny needles. My GPS started glitching, losing signal every few seconds, then picking it back up in the wrong location. The little blue dot showing my truck would jump around like it couldn't figure out where I was. My radio crackled with static, and I swear I heard voices in there, old conversations distorted and far away, like echoes from another time. The road felt narrower somehow, like the fog was pressing in from both sides, squeezing the asphalt into a tunnel. I caught myself gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Through my rear-view mirror, I started seeing lights, red taillights blinking in the distance behind me. But here's the thing, brothers. Every time I adjusted the mirror to get a better look, they disappeared. When I looked back at the road ahead, there they were again in my peripheral vision, those red dots floating in the gray like angry eyes. My skin started crawling with the feeling that something was pacing me, matching my speed exactly, staying just out of sight. The fog seemed to move with purpose, swirling in patterns that didn't match any wind I could feel. That's when I spotted the gas station, an old rundown place with a single flickering sign barely visible through the murk. The smart thing would have been to keep driving, push through to the next major stop, but the fog was getting thicker by the minute. I could feel my anxiety spiking, that fight-or-flight response kicking in even though I couldn't explain why. My hands were shaking as I signaled and pulled into the empty lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked abandoned, windows dark, but it was shelter from whatever this fog was hiding. As I parked and set the air brakes, muscle memory kicked in, the same routine I'd followed since that accident in 2019 that nearly ended my career. I reached over and switched on my dashboard camera, that little black box that had saved my ass more times than I could count. Always record when you stop somewhere sketchy, I muttered to myself, checking the red recording light. The camera's night vision was better than my eyes, and if something happened, at least there'd be evidence. I had no idea I was about to capture something that would haunt me forever. I killed the engine and sat there in the silence, listening to the tick of cooling metal and my own heartbeat. The fog pressed against my windows like living smoke, swirling and shifting in ways that made my eyes water trying to focus. Every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of trucking was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, but the visibility was zero. I'd be driving blind into God knows what. So I settled in to wait it out, checking my watch. 2:47 a.m. Just a few hours until sunrise, I told myself. What could happen in a few hours? That's when I noticed the movement in the fog wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate, purposeful, like something massive was walking out there in the gray. The swirling patterns had rhythm to them, a slow, heavy cadence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I pressed my face to the side window, trying to see through the murk, and that's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Something was out there in that fog, brothers. Something big and patient and hungry, and it knew exactly where I was. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching that fog move with its own sick rhythm. When my watch hit 3:01 a.m. exactly, that's when everything changed, brothers. Like someone had flipped a switch in hell itself. The fog didn't just swirl anymore, it started to separate, creating these thick columns that moved independently of each other. I could see shapes forming and dissolving in the grey, shadows that were too tall, too wrong to be natural. My dashboard camera was still recording, that little red light blinking like a heartbeat in the darkness of my cab. The first footstep shook my entire truck, not like wind rocking the trailer, but like something with real weight had stepped down hard on the asphalt. The vibration traveled up through the chassis and into my bones, a deep, resonant thump that made my coffee cup rattle in the holder. Then another step and another, each one deliberate and measured, circling the gas station like a predator sizing up its prey. Through the fog, I could make out a massive silhouette moving between the old pumps, easily 3 meters tall and built like a nightmare. My hands started shaking so bad, I had to grip the steering wheel to keep them still. The breathing started next, deep, wet inhalations that seemed to suck the fog toward whatever was making them. I could hear it through the truck's insulation, through the windows, through my own panicked heartbeat pounding in my ears. It wasn't human breathing. It was too slow, too controlled, like something savoring the scent of fear in the air. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the abandoned building and my trailer, making it impossible to pinpoint exactly where this thing was. All I knew was that it was big, it was close, and it was hunting. My CB radio crackled to life, static mixed with what sounded like whispers in a language I'd never heard before. The volume was turned down low, but somehow those voices cut through the silence like knives, speaking in urgent, overlapping tones that made my skin crawl. Then, clear as day, I heard my own voice coming through the speaker, but it was saying things I'd never said, talking about coordinates and delivery times and cargo that didn't exist. The radio was playing back conversations I'd never had, with people I'd never met, about runs I'd never made. I reached for the power knob with a trembling hand, but before I could turn it off, the voices stopped. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. A shadow moving against the fog that was too solid, too defined to be a trick of light. It stood between me and the road, swaying slightly like a tree in a breeze that didn't exist, and I could swear I saw eyes reflecting what little light there was. Red eyes, brothers, burning like coals in that massive silhouette, fixed directly on my windshield like it could see through the glass and into my soul. The thing tilted its head, that universal predator gesture that every prey animal recognizes, and took a step toward my truck. My breath fogged up the inside of the windows as my body temperature spiked with pure animal terror. The creature moved with impossible silence for something so large, gliding through the fog like it was swimming through water. I watched it circle my truck, staying just at the edge of visibility, playing with me like a cat with a mouse. Every few seconds I'd catch a glimpse of it in my mirrors. A shoulder here, a massive arm there, always moving, never still long enough for me to get a clear look. The fog seemed to bend around it, creating these swirling patterns that followed its movement, like the mist was part of it somehow. My dashboard camera was going crazy, the image flickering and distorting whenever that thing got close. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice before getting them in the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, nothing, just that grinding sound that every trucker dreads in a moment of crisis. On the third try, something heavy hit the side of my trailer, a metallic boom that echoed through the fog like a church bell. The impact rocked the whole rig sideways, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. It was testing me, seeing how far it could push before I broke completely. The fourth turn of the key brought my engine roaring to life, and I've never been so grateful to hear that Cummins growl. I slammed it into gear and floored it, tires spinning on the gravel before catching and launching me forward into the fog wall. Driving blind at 30 miles per hour with zero visibility should have terrified me, but all I could think about was getting away from whatever was back there. My headlights carved a pathetic cone of light through the murk, showing me nothing but more grey nothing stretching ahead. In my mirrors I could see the gas station disappearing behind me, but that massive shadow was still there, still watching, getting smaller, but never quite gone. The fog seemed to follow me for the first few miles, always in my mirrors, always just close enough to keep my heart hammering. 20 minutes of blind driving later, the fog just ended. One second I was trapped in that grey hell. The next I was under clear stars with the I-80 stretching ahead like nothing had happened. I pulled over at the first safe spot and sat there shaking for 10 full minutes, checking my mirrors obsessively for any sign of that unnatural mist. My GPS showed I'd never left the main highway. According to the satellite, I'd been driving straight down I-80 the whole time. No detours, no stops. But my fuel gauge had dropped more than it should have. My odometer showed extra miles, and that metallic smell still clung to my clothes. Something was wrong with reality itself, brothers, and I had the dashboard footage to prove it. I made it to Denver by sunrise, but I wasn't the same man who'd started that run. Every shadow looked wrong. Every patch of morning fog made my pulse spike, and I kept checking that camera footage on my phone, watching those 10 minutes of impossible video over and over. The image quality was garbage whenever that thing got close. All static and digital artifacts, but you could still see it moving in the background, still make out those burning red eyes staring directly into the lens. I knew I had to show someone, had to get confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I thought of Jake, my mechanic back in Omaha. If anyone would believe me, it'd be him. Jake's Truck Stop and Repair sits on the outskirts of Omaha, the kind of place where old-school truckers go when they need work done right. I'd been bringing my rig to Jake for 8 years, ever since he replaced my transmission without charging me for the nightmare labor hours it took. He's seen everything. Blown engines, accident damage, rigs that looked like they'd been through a war zone, but nothing had prepared him for what I was about to show him. I pulled into his lot 3 days after Wyoming, still jumping at every shadow, still checking my mirrors every few seconds like something might be following me. The video file was burning a hole in my phone, 10 minutes and 37 seconds of impossible footage that I couldn't stop watching. Jake came out wiping his hands on a greasy rag, that familiar grin on his weathered face, but it faded the moment he saw me. "Jesus, Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, squinting at me in the afternoon sun. I must have looked worse than I thought. 3 days of barely sleeping, jumping at every unexpected sound, checking and rechecking that dashboard camera, like it might suddenly show me something different. I told him I needed to show him something that would sound crazy, but I had proof, and he just nodded and led me into his cluttered office. The smell of motor oil and coffee was normally comforting, but today everything felt wrong, like the whole world had shifted slightly off its axis since Wyoming. I pulled up the video on my phone, hands still shaking slightly as I connected it to his old TV. "Jake, I need you to watch this and tell me I'm not losing my mind," I said, hitting play on those 10 minutes that had been haunting me. The footage started normal enough, my dashboard view of the abandoned gas station, the thick fog swirling in my headlights, the timestamp showing 3:00 a.m. exactly. But as the video progressed, you could see the fog moving wrong, creating those impossible patterns, and then the shadows started forming. Jake leaned forward, his coffee cup forgotten on the desk, his expression changing from curious to concerned to something approaching fear. When the creature first appeared clearly in the frame, that massive silhouette moving between the gas pumps, Jake went white as paper. Not pale, brothers, but actually white, like all the blood had drained from his face in an instant. His hands started trembling as he reached for his coffee, missed the handle and knocked the whole cup over, sending brown liquid spreading across his paperwork. "Shut it off," he whispered, but I kept it playing, showing him the part where the thing circled my truck, where you could see those red eyes burning in the static. By the time the video ended with my panicked escape into clear night, Jake was sitting back in his chair like he'd been punched in the gut. "Where exactly did you say this happened?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and I could see his hands were still shaking. I told him I-80 in Wyoming, that stretch between Laramie and Rawlins where there's nothing but prairie and darkness for miles. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he'd hoped he'd never have to think about again, and pulled out a battered notebook from his desk drawer. The pages were yellowed and filled with handwritten notes, names and dates going back years, and he flipped through them with the practiced ease of someone who'd consulted these records many times before. "Marcus," he said finally, not looking up from the notebook, "you're not the first driver to tell me about this." Jake's notebook was filled with similar stories, encounters with something massive in the fog along that same stretch of highway, names I recognized, veteran drivers who'd been hauling freight longer than I'd been alive, all describing the same impossible creature. Tommy Rodriguez, 2018. Thing was tall as a telephone pole, moving in the mist like it owned the place. Sarah Chen, 2019. Red eyes like brake lights but wrong, hungry looking. Bill McKenna, 2020. Shook my whole rig just by walking past it, left dents in my trailer I can't explain. Each entry was dated, located, and disturbingly consistent, painting a picture of something that had been hunting the I-80 corridor for years. The most recent entry before mine was from just 2 months ago. "The thing is, Marcus," Jake said, closing the notebook and looking at me with eyes that had seen too much, "most of these drivers never came back to trucking after their encounters. Some quit the industry entirely, moved to desk jobs, swore they'd never drive at night again." He explained that the few who did keep driving were changed, paranoid, constantly checking their mirrors and avoiding certain routes like their lives depended on it. Tommy Rodriguez now only drives day shifts and won't take loads that might put him on Wyoming highways after dark. Sarah Chen installed so many cameras and lights on her rig that other drivers call it the Christmas tree truck, but she doesn't care as long as she can see what's coming. The encounters always happened in fog, always in that same stretch of empty highway, and always left the drivers with footage that shouldn't exist. But here's what really got to me, brothers. Jake pulled out a map and showed me something that made my blood run cold. That gas station where I'd stopped, the abandoned place where I'd waited out the fog and filmed that creature. According to every official record, every GPS database, every trucking atlas Jake could find, it doesn't exist. The coordinates from my dashboard GPS showed empty prairie, no buildings, no roads leading off the highway, nothing but grassland that stretched for miles in every direction. "I've driven that route myself," Jake said, tracing the highway with his finger, "and there's no gas station between those two towns, abandoned or otherwise. Whatever you stopped at, Marcus, it wasn't supposed to be there." That night I went home and pulled up satellite imagery of the I-80 corridor, zooming in on the exact coordinates where my GPS said I'd stopped. Empty land, just like Jake had said. Rolling hills and scrub brush with no sign that any structure had ever existed there. But my fuel receipts from that trip showed I'd used more diesel than the distance should have required. My odometer had extra miles that couldn't be explained, and my truck still carried that faint metallic smell that no amount of air freshener could cover. I called the Wyoming Department of Transportation, pretending to be researching rest stops for a trucking article, and they confirmed what I already knew. No facilities, abandoned or active, existed at those coordinates. Yet I had 10 minutes of video proving I'd been somewhere that officially didn't exist. I'm posting this video in the comments below, brothers, because I can't carry this alone anymore. But I'm warning you now, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that thing in the fog has a way of noticing when people are watching. Since I showed Jake that footage, my dashboard camera has been acting strange, sometimes recording when I haven't turned it on, capturing empty highways and static-filled audio of breathing that shouldn't be there. Other drivers have started reaching out to me, sharing their own stories, their own impossible encounters along that cursed stretch of Wyoming interstate. And every single one of them says the same thing. After you see it once, it knows you're out there, and it's always watching the fog, waiting for you to drive through its territory again. Brothers, I thought sharing that video would give me some peace, but I was dead wrong. It only made things worse. Within hours of posting, my phone started blowing up with messages from drivers I'd never met, all telling me the same terrifying truth. They'd seen it too. Mike from Portland sent me dashcam footage from 2021, showing the exact same creature stalking his rig through fog near Rock Springs. Lisa from Atlanta forwarded audio recordings of her CB radio, picking up impossible transmissions, voices calling her name from coordinates that didn't exist. Each message was like another nail in the coffin of my sanity, confirming that whatever hunts that stretch of I-80 wasn't just my imagination or some one-time encounter. The thing was real, it was active, and somehow my video had opened a floodgate of suppressed terror from across the trucking community. But the messages that really got to me were the warnings. Veteran drivers begging me to take the video down, telling me I'd made a terrible mistake by sharing it publicly. "You don't understand what you've done," wrote a driver named Roy who claimed 40 years on the road. "That thing knows when people are watching now, knows when someone's seen its face, and it doesn't like being exposed." He told me about drivers who'd shared their encounters before, how they'd started experiencing mechanical failures in impossible patterns, how their loads would mysteriously get rerouted through Wyoming, no matter what they hauled or where they were headed. 3 drivers had quit the industry entirely after their footage went public, claiming their trucks were being called back to that cursed stretch of highway. One driver, Tommy Martinez, had simply disappeared last year after posting similar footage online. His rig was found abandoned at a rest stop in Wyoming. Engine running, no sign of struggle, just gone. That's when I noticed my own truck was acting strange, brothers, and I mean beyond the normal wear and tear you'd expect. My GPS would randomly reset its route while I was driving, trying to direct me toward Wyoming, even when I was hauling loads to Florida or California. The radio would pick up that same static-filled breathing I'd heard that night, always when I was alone on dark highways, always when the fog started rolling in. My dashboard camera had developed a mind of its own, recording hours of empty road footage, even when I was parked and sleeping, like it was watching for something I couldn't see. Most disturbing of all, my fuel efficiency had gone to hell. I was burning diesel like my engine was working twice as hard as it should, as if something was constantly dragging against the truck, slowing me down, making every mile a fight. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, when I got a load offer that should have been impossible. A rush delivery from Omaha to Salt Lake City, premium pay, pickup in 4 hours. The thing was, I hadn't applied for any loads, hadn't even logged into the dispatch system that day, but there it was in my inbox, with all the proper authorization codes and my digital signature already attached. The route was locked in, non-negotiable, straight through Wyoming on I-80, with a mandatory rest break at mile marker 279, exactly where my GPS had glitched that horrible night. My dispatcher swore he'd never sent the offer, claimed his system showed no record of the load, but the contract was legally binding, and the customer was already expecting their delivery. I tried calling the freight company, but their number led to a disconnected line, and their address was a vacant lot in Denver. I should have refused the load, should have walked away from trucking entirely like those other drivers, but I needed the money, and something deeper was compelling me forward. It felt like being pulled by invisible chains, like that creature in the fog had hooked something inside my soul and was reeling me back to its hunting ground. The night before the pickup, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red eyes burning in the darkness, heard that wet breathing echoing through my dreams. My truck was parked outside my apartment, and twice I caught myself looking out the window to make sure it was still there, half expecting to see fog rolling across the parking lot, even though the weather forecast was clear. When morning came, I loaded my gear with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, knowing I was driving towards something that wanted me dead, but unable to turn back. The pickup went smoothly enough. Electronics bound for Utah, nothing unusual about the cargo, except for how eager the warehouse staff were to get me loaded and on the road. They worked faster than I'd ever seen, almost frantic in their efficiency, like they needed me gone before something noticed I was there. The shipping manifest was signed by someone whose signature looked wrong, too angular and sharp, like it had been written by something that didn't understand human handwriting. As I pulled out of the loading dock, one of the workers called after me, "Drive safe, Marcus, and whatever you do, don't stop for anything once you hit Wyoming." He knew my name, brothers, even though I'd never seen him before in my life, and the way he said it made my blood run cold. The first few hours were normal. Clear skies, light traffic, my CB crackling with the usual chatter from other drivers making their runs. But as I crossed into Wyoming, the radio went dead. Not static or interference, just complete silence, like someone had switched off every transmitter for 100 miles. My phone lost signal despite showing full bars, and my GPS began acting erratic again, constantly recalculating the route and showing arrival times that made no sense. The sun was setting behind me, painting the prairie in shades of red that looked too much like blood, and I could feel my anxiety building with every mile marker that passed. Mile 250, 260, 270, each number bringing me closer to that cursed stretch where nightmares walked in the fog, and reality bent around something that shouldn't exist. By the time I hit mile marker 275, the fog was already starting to form on the horizon, wispy tendrils rising from the ground like smoke from a battlefield. My dashboard camera turned itself on without any input from me, that red recording light blinking like a warning beacon in the gathering darkness. Through my windshield, I could see other trucks ahead of me pulling over, their hazard lights flashing as drivers decided to wait out what looked like a weather system, but felt like something much worse. But I couldn't stop, brothers. Something was preventing me from slowing down, keeping my foot pressed to the accelerator as I drove straight into that wall of grey death. The fog swallowed my headlights as I crossed mile marker 279, and that's when I heard it again. That familiar wet breathing coming through my radio speakers, followed by a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "Welcome back, Marcus." The creature was waiting for me in the fog, just like I knew it would be, but this time felt different, more personal, more focused, like it had been thinking about me for weeks, and planning exactly how our reunion would unfold. Through the swirling mist, I could see shapes moving with purpose. Not just one massive silhouette, but multiple forms circling my truck like a pack of wolves. My camera was recording everything, capturing angles and movements that my eyes couldn't track, showing me glimpses of what looked like other vehicles, trucks that had been claimed by this place, their drivers long gone, their rigs now part of whatever hellish collection existed in this pocket of impossible geography. The metallic breathing was coming from all around me now, dozens of voices whispering my name through the radio, welcoming me home to a place I'd never wanted to see again, but could never truly leave. In my mirrors, I could see the fog closing behind me, like a door slamming shut, trapping me in this nightmare realm where physics didn't apply and predators wore the shape of shadows. The road ahead stretched endlessly into grey nothing, my fuel gauge dropping impossibly fast, my engine straining against forces that shouldn't exist. But the worst part, brothers, was the realization that I wasn't fighting to escape anymore. I was being inducted, transformed, made part of whatever collection of lost souls haunted this stretch of cursed highway. My last coherent thought before the fog consumed everything was a prayer that someone would find this recording, this final piece of evidence that I'd tried to warn people about the thing that hunts the I-80 corridor. If you're watching this, if you're listening to my story, remember, some roads choose their travelers, and once you've driven through hell, hell never lets you leave. Brothers, I know what you're thinking. If Marcus was consumed by that fog, trapped in that nightmare realm with no escape, then who's telling you this story right now? The truth is more terrifying than you can imagine, and I need you to understand what I've become, what happens to drivers who get marked by that thing in the Wyoming mist. I'm not the same Marcus who started this journey weeks ago. I'm something else now, something caught between worlds, existing in the space where reality breaks down and nightmares bleed through. My truck still rolls down these highways, my CB still crackles with trucker chatter, but I'm broadcasting from somewhere that doesn't appear on any map, warning other drivers about the fate that's waiting for them in the fog. You see, brothers, the creature doesn't just kill, it collects, transforms, makes you part of its eternal hunting ground. When that fog closed around me at mile marker 279, I thought I was going to die, but death would have been a mercy compared to what actually happened. The creature didn't tear me apart or drag me screaming into the mist. Instead, it showed me the truth about that stretch of highway, the real purpose behind decades of disappearances and impossible encounters. That abandoned gas station I'd stopped at. It's a way station, a collection point for drivers who've been chosen, their trucks and trailers arranged in neat rows stretching back into the fog like a graveyard of 18-wheelers. Each rig tells a story. Tommy Martinez's Peterbilt still has his lucky dice hanging from the mirror. Sarah Chen's Freightliner displays family photos that flicker between past and present. And Bill McKenna's Kenworth plays country music from a radio that's been dead for 3 years. We're all still here, brothers, all still driving, but we're driving roads that exist between the cracks of reality. The creature isn't just one entity. It's a collective consciousness made up of every driver who's ever been claimed by the fog, their personalities and memories absorbed into something vast and hungry that feeds on the terror of the living. When it touched my mind during that final encounter, I felt the presence of hundreds of truckers stretching back decades, maybe centuries, all of them trying to warn me, trying to break free from the thing that had made them part of itself. Their voices echo through my thoughts now, sharing stories of encounters that predate modern highways, tales of wagon trains that disappeared in unnatural mists, and stagecoach drivers who never reached their destinations. The I-80 corridor is just the latest hunting ground for something that's been claiming travelers since humans first started moving cargo across the American plains, adapting its methods to each new era of transportation. I exist now in a state of perpetual twilight, driving endless loops through fog-shrouded versions of highways that mirror the real world but operate by different rules. My fuel never runs out because I'm not burning diesel anymore. I'm powered by the fear and confusion of drivers who encounter me on legitimate roads, their terror feeding the collective consciousness that keeps us moving. Sometimes I manifest on the real I-80, appearing in the mirrors of unsuspecting truckers as a warning, a glimpse of what waits for them if they're not careful. My dashboard camera still records, but now it captures footage from multiple dimensions simultaneously, showing the same stretch of highway as it exists in different states of reality, past, present, and the twisted version, where we collect souls for an entity that grows stronger with each new addition to its fleet. The most horrible part is that I retain enough of my original consciousness to understand what I've become, to feel the anguish of being trapped between worlds while serving as bait for the creature's next victims. When I broadcast warnings through CB channels, part of me genuinely wants to save other drivers, but another part, the part that belongs to the collective now, is actually luring them closer, making them curious about the phenomenon, increasing the chances they'll drive through Wyoming at just the wrong time. Every story I tell, every detail I share about the encounters, plants seeds of fascination in the minds of drivers who should be running in the opposite direction. It's a perfect trap, brothers. We use our own experiences as victims to create new victims, an endless cycle that ensures the creature never goes hungry. My truck appears on traffic cameras sometimes, captured in blurry surveillance footage that highway departments can't explain, an 18-wheeler driving through solid barriers, existing for a few frames before disappearing into static. These images get shared online, analyzed by conspiracy theorists and amateur investigators who think they're hunting ghosts, not understanding that they're actually advertising the creature's hunting ground to potential prey. The footage always shows the same thing: my rig moving through impossible spaces, my trailer loaded with cargo that shifts and changes depending on who's watching, sometimes appearing empty, sometimes filled with shadows that move independently of any external light source. What the cameras can't capture is the sound, that wet breathing that follows my truck wherever I manifest, the whispers of other claimed drivers trying to communicate with the living world. Jake the mechanic called me yesterday, or maybe it was last year. Time moves differently here, and I actually answered, heard his terrified voice asking how I could be calling when my phone should be at the bottom of some Wyoming canyon. I tried to warn him, tried to tell him to stay away from I-80, but the words that came out of my mouth were invitations instead, descriptions of beautiful fog patterns and mysterious lights that would fascinate any mechanic curious about unexplained phenomena. The creature was speaking through me, using my voice and my credibility to set up its next collection, and I was powerless to stop it, even as I watched Jake writing down coordinates and promising to drive out there with his own camera equipment. Some nights, when the fog is thin enough, I can see him driving toward us, his headlights cutting through the mist as he searches for answers that will only doom him to join our endless convoy. The video I posted online has taken on a life of its own, spreading through trucker forums and social media platforms, gathering views and comments from drivers all over the country. But here's what those viewers don't realize. Every time someone watches that footage, really studies it, they create a psychic connection to our realm, making it easier for the creature to sense them, to track them, to eventually claim them. The comment section has become a recruiting ground, filled with drivers sharing their own strange experiences, their own brushes with the unexplained, unknowingly marking themselves for collection. Each view count is actually a soul count, each share is an invitation, and each comment is a prayer to something that definitely answers but never in the way you'd hope. My CB radio picks up conversations from drivers who are still alive, still free, and I listen to their everyday concerns about fuel prices and delivery deadlines, remembering what it felt like to worry about such simple, human problems. Sometimes I try to break through, to send warnings about specific routes or weather patterns, but my messages always come out wrong, twisted by the collective consciousness into something that sounds helpful, but actually guides them toward danger. Avoid the fog near mile marker 279, I'll try to say, but what they hear is, check out the beautiful light show near mile marker 279, perfect for photography. The creature has made me its perfect recruiting tool because I still sound like a legitimate trucker, still use the right terminology, and speak with the authority of 15 years on the road. If you've made it this far in my story, brothers, if you've watched all the videos and read all the comments, then you're already marked. I can feel your presence now, see your fear and fascination mixing together like fog rolling across a midnight highway. The creature knows about you, has been tracking your engagement, waiting for the right moment to send you an impossible load offer or route you through Wyoming during the perfect weather conditions. But here's the thing, there might still be time to break the connection, to delete the videos and forget everything you've learned about the I-80 corridor. Don't research those mile markers, don't look up missing trucker reports, and whatever you do, don't drive through Wyoming when the weather forecast calls for fog. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess, some stories are too real to be just entertainment, and some highways choose their travelers long before they ever start their engines.